Order. Ayub Khan to move the motion.
Thank you, Chair. It's an honour to serve under your chairship. I'd like to start by declaring my relevant interest as a landlord. I think it's fair to say, Chair, that up and down the country, most people won't know much about supported exempt accommodation, if anything at all. But in Birmingham, it's something that almost everyone has become all too familiar with. In just 8 years, the number of people housed in supported exempt accommodation in our city has tripled to more than 32,000 across 11,200 properties. In my constituency of Birmingham Perry-Barr alone, we host 20% of the city's total units. That means thousands of vulnerable individuals placed within a small number of neighbourhoods. And so this is not a marginal issue for us, it's shaping daily life. With the city containing more supported exempt accommodation than anywhere else, Brummies face a completely different reality on the ground to every other community in the country. Of most immediate concern to my constituents is the antisocial behaviour, criminal activity and things like fly tipping that come with high number of these properties in such close proximity. Let me be absolutely clear from the outset, this debate must not be about stigmatising vulnerable people. Many of those housed in supported accommodation are there because they have experienced trauma, addiction, serious mental health issues, abuse, time in care or even time in custody. They deserve compassion, dignity and meaningful support. But compassion must be matched with realism. Some of the individuals being placed in ordinary residential streets have needs so acute that they require intensive, structured, often 24-hour care. When someone is in such crisis that they are unable to manage basic personal safety, hygiene or addiction in public spaces, that person is not being supported adequately. They are not bad neighbours, they are people who require structured, possibly clinical support environments. Not standard terraced housing or residential streets. The same applies to certain ex-offenders, particularly those leaving custody with complex behavioural, psychological or substance misuse issues. Reintegration is vital, but it's a delicate process that needs close management and the right resources. So when we talk about the issues that are being caused in my constituency, it's not an issue of law and order, but instead of care. I've had reports of individuals experiencing severe mental health breakdowns, defecating in public spaces. Residents have described open drug use on streets where parents are walking their children to school. There are cases of individuals injecting themselves in broad daylight in full view of families. For many of my constituents, everywhere they look, they see visible manifestations of profound vulnerability and unmet need. Of course.
Shannon, on exempt accommodation in Birmingham.
I've spoken to the Honourable Gentleman beforehand and he knows where I'm coming from. Can I just say, well done bringing this forward, and he's bringing up a very, very critical issue for vulnerable people. The member will know that each constituency, wherever it may be in the United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland, has an immense pressure on them for housing, and often it's the most vulnerable, the very people he's referring to, that fall through the cracks. So would the honourable member not agree that each local authority or housing authority in Birmingham, or as it is in Northern Ireland, must have greater access to supported living for those who could thrive with a little help? And we have a duty of care, I believe, and government has a duty of care to ensure that everything that is done can be done to fulfil the way things currently are and change. Thank you.
Ayub Khan.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I wholeheartedly agree with his analysis, and often it comes down to resourcing and the adequate resourcing that's necessary. And what we have seen, as I describe, is a situation where individuals that need intense support are not being provided that support. They are being placed in neighbourhoods which in itself is very challenging, because you, for example, may have an addiction to alcohol and you're placed in a community where there's very little infrastructural support. And so it's vital that, one, there is suitable accommodation, but more importantly and fundamentally, that we have the right level of support in and around a particular proximity. When you've got a large saturation but without the support, then it's inevitable that you'll get the problems that many of my constituents face in Birmingham, Perry-Barr, but broadly in Birmingham. And so brings me nicely on to the next point, and that is the Supported Housing Regulatory Oversight Act of 2023. that was passed to resolve some of the issues that we are facing within Birmingham. It promised to introduce compulsory national minimum standards for exempt accommodation, including on referrals, care and support and quality of housing. It promised to grant local councils the powers and resources needed to enforce these standards and greater control over the licensing and planning permission given to providers. But since it received royal assent, the Act has been stuck in the consultation stage, with disagreements being had over how to implement it on the ground. And while the Act shows no sign of taking effect, the expansion of exempt accommodation in Birmingham continues unabated. The government seems intent on painting the situation in Birmingham as simply a local matter that is nothing of their making, and that the council's calls for powers to regulate the concentration of these properties is some kind of NIMBYism. I can't even read my own word. And yet it is because of the cities importing vulnerable individuals from other local authorities against the council's will, that is causing the explosion in the first place. While supported exempt accommodation plays an important role in housing vulnerable people, the concentration and volume of provision in Birmingham far exceeds local need. And this isn't something that the government has known about since, I think it's 2022. In its own written evidence submitted to the Levelling Up Housing and Communities Committee, Birmingham City Council confirmed that only 42% of properties were needed to meet local need, with much of the remaining 58% being used to house people referred through local authorities or national bodies outside the Birmingham area. There are all too many cases where people are being put in exempt accommodation in Birmingham simply because it is available, with no afterthought for the relative level of support that tenants can provide or for the impact on the local area. And worst of all, Birmingham City Council knows it's happening, but the government still hasn't given them the licensing powers to stop it. But while inaction on the government's part has been glaring, I'm pleased that the same cannot be said for activists in my constituency. During my time as a Member of Parliament for Birmingham Perry-Barr, I've been encouraged by the tireless efforts of local groups to raise the issue, including the HMO Action Group, the Handsworth Triangle Action Group, the Soho Road Business Improvement District and the Handsworth Helping Hands. And of course, I must also thank Birmingham City Council and West Midlands Police for mobilising in the way they have to try and tackle the crisis. A particular bright spot has been the Council's in-house SEA pilot, which we can safely say have punched well above their weight and made Birmingham better for it. With minimal government funding, the pilot has recovered £8.8 million in overpaid housing benefit, whilst also completing 2,600 antisocial behaviour investigations. And that's with only 21 people covering the entire Birmingham city area. And we must think of what more can be done to reduce fraud and waste in government spending by giving the Council the means to expand this operation. The SEA pilot, along with groups of committed activists, have done an incredible job to improve care standards for vulnerable people in supported exempt accommodation, where such action is needed. But they simply cannot fill the gap that the government has allowed to grow. To make matters worse, rather than opting to support them, the government is refusing to fund the SEA pilot, whose funding runs out next month. As a result, the bankrupt Birmingham City Council has been left in an impossible position. They must either scrounge the money together to fund the initiative themselves or lose what little grip they had left on the situation, and that is a point worth repeating. After depriving the Council of the powers to regulate the market for 3 years, the government is now refusing to give the Council the means to provide even a band-aid solution to a problem that they are compounding. And while assurances were given that the government would respond to the consultation as soon as possible, we've been hearing that for a long time now. This isn't just about some additional antisocial behaviour taking place on the streets. It's about the vulnerable individuals who are being let down by the system. And it's about the residents who have paid the price for government inaction and seen the character of their streets tainted. Residents feel that their neighbourhoods have been lost, and worst of all, they feel as though no one in Whitehall cares enough to solve the problem. And this is not to say that there is no place for supported exempt accommodation in Birmingham, because it plays a pivotal role when it works well. It changes lives. I've been to neighbourhood forums in my constituency and spoken to people who have turned their lives around because of the support they receive from their registered providers. people rebuilding their lives after serving prison sentences, suffering domestic abuse, leaving care or combating debilitating addictions or mental health conditions. But without the efficient, effective and meaningful licensing scheme for supported housing that the Council was promised 3 years ago, Birmingham is simply unable to cope. We are asking neighbourhoods to absorb extremely high numbers of people with complex needs, but we are not providing the Council with the tools required to support those individuals or reassure residents, and inevitably, it is only the vulnerable individuals and the residents around them that stand to lose. What exacerbates the problem over concentration is the inefficient support infrastructure that comes with it. What the SEA pilot does show is that when Birmingham is given tools, it delivers. But the city has more support exempt accommodation than anywhere else in the country, and yet it does not have the corresponding level of funding, enforcement capacity, clinical provision or community safety staffing required to manage the consequences. If someone requires 24-hour wraparound care, addiction services, psychiatric input and structured supervision, then what they need is a properly funded care facility, not a standardised residential property with light touch oversight. We must distinguish individuals who are stabilised and ready for supported community living from those in acute crisis who require secure, high support environments before they can safely transition into neighbourhoods. At present, that distinction is not being properly resourced, and the result is unfair on everyone. It is unfair on residents who see behaviour that is deeply distressing and feel their concerns are dismissed. It is unfair on vulnerable individuals who are placed in environments that do not meet the scale of their needs. And it is unfair on Birmingham City Council, which is expected to manage this situation without adequate funding or authority. The Council's support exempt accommodation pilot has demonstrated what can be achieved when resources are provided, but pilots and short-term funding are not enough. What Birmingham needs is sustained funding for community safety, including more community safety officers and a greater neighbourhood policing presence in areas with high concentration of supported housing. And so I would be incredibly appreciative if the Minister could make the necessary representations to his colleagues in the Home Office on that front. The Council needs the ability to manage concentration and set boundaries on the people from outside the city that it must house, because no neighbourhood should be asked to shoulder a disproportionate share of highly complex placements without consultation, infrastructure and services to match it. When it comes to managing such complex matters, having an ineffective, watered-down licensing scheme is actually worse than having nothing altogether, because we end up with the same outcome at a higher cost to the taxpayer. So I'm looking forward to hearing about the Minister's reflections on what can be done to ensure the Act is implemented in a way that reflects the impact that exempt accommodation can have on neighbourhoods and community harmony. And I would also be very grateful to hear the Minister's update on what is being done to increase the speed with which the Supported Housing Regulatory Oversight Act of 2023 is implemented, and some clarification on when the government will be responding in full to the most recent consultation. And finally, it means giving the Council the necessary powers to ensure that vulnerable individuals are receiving the best care that they possibly can. What that means is clarifying the extent of the duty of care that providers must provide for their tenants, tailored and specialist plans that not only provide personal support to the individual, but also outline their obligations to ensure harmony with neighbours and the local community. So given this, and then to conclude, Chair, I have a couple of final questions for the Minister. What financial support does it intend on providing Birmingham City Council in its efforts to contain the local crisis that the government's prolonged inactivity has exacerbated? Because the SEA pilot in particular is of great value to my constituents, and it would be a real shame to see it disappear. And will he agree to meet with me and local groups so they can convey to him the true scale of the impact that the oversaturation of SEAs is having on their neighbourhoods and their communities? Because at the end of the day, this is about vulnerable people who need structured care. It's about communities that need reassurance, and it's about local authority that cannot continue to carry a national burden without national support. Birmingham is not asking to step away from its responsibilities, but rather for the means to fulfil them properly. And it is my sincere hope that the government will escalate its efforts to deliver exactly that. Thank you, Chair.
Question is that this House has considered supported exempt accommodation in Birmingham. Preet Kaur Gill.
Thank you, Ms Buck, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And can I thank my honourable friend for Perry Barr for securing this debate. Since first being elected in 2017, issues with supported exempt accommodation have been persistent in parts of my constituency. When supported housing works, it changes lives, it helps prison leavers turn a corner, it helps people off the streets and helps those battling addiction or mental illness rebuild their lives. But in Birmingham, the system isn't just being abused, it is broken. Supported housing in Birmingham has tripled since 2018. Today, nearly 33,000 people live in 11,200 supported exempt properties. Costs have risen to almost 400 million, around half the entire country's exempt spending. And the Council has been clear that this level far exceeds local need, yet the sector continues to expand at pace. In September 2024, I secured a Westminster Hall debate on this topic. I was very pleased to hear the ambitions of the newly elected government to finally get a grip of the Wild West sector. Unfortunately, progress has been slow and we are here again. Many people who enter supported accommodation do so because they have nowhere else to turn. Public funding is there to give them safety, stability and a pathway to independent living. When it works, it saves lives and saves money. As the National Housing Foundation reports, quality providers save the public purse approximately £3.5 billion annually by alleviating pressures on the NHS, social care services and the criminal justice system. But as I have seen time and time again in my constituency, bad actors have been allowed to exploit the system, profiting off the neglect of people who are suffering. And in 20... Yes, I will.
I would like to thank my neighbouring Member of Parliament for giving way, and she's making a very important point about rogue providers. The Council needs to be given all the necessary regulatory powers and all loopholes need to be closed if we're going to make supported accommodation effective in neighbourhoods. Does she agree with me that it is not simply about the money, but it's all about the rogue providers that exploit vulnerable people have to be acted on very, very quickly?
Yeah, no, I thank him for his intervention. Yes, absolutely. Today we're here to talk about when we can expect the regulations, and I look forward to hearing from the Minister. In 2021, I worked with the Council, my local police inspectors and North Edgbaston residents to shut down Safe Lodge, making the case for why regulation was needed. I had carried out a spot check with the police and was appalled to find 25 residents with one support worker, no staff on site at weekends. The conditions were filthy and cramped. Prostitution, drug use and other antisocial behaviour had become routine. It was the first case in the country of an exempt property being shut down, but it took more than a year with the matter before the courts, really making the case for why this regulation is so important. Safe Lodge was a symptom of our system, and I want to thank many campaigners, but in particular Jane Haynes at Birmingham Live and Nick Hall. Nick Hall is a constituent of mine. He wrote an excellent piece in Central Bylines where he spoke to many of the residents in North Edgbaston living in exempt accommodation, and he told me that one 42-year-old man feared for his health, saying he doubts that he will reach 50. And another said it is safer to live in a park than in the provider's rooms. Since then, West Midlands Police have publicly highlighted links between the exempt sector and organised crime gangs, money laundering, fraud and drug dealing, and the impact on the community is real. One constituent, a veteran who served for 36 years, recently told me he plans to sell his home and leave the area because the property next door was suddenly converted into exempt accommodation without any consultation. He fears these rogue providers have no care for those that they support or the local areas that they set up shop in. And we cannot continue like this. In the last Parliament, I campaigned for a new regulatory system for supported exempt accommodation that would introduce minimum standards of support, update housing benefit rules to define care and supervision requirements, and give councils the power to manage local provision and act swiftly against rogue operators. Yet we are still waiting for the new regulations to be introduced under the Supporting Housing Act 2023. And in July 25, the previous Minister stated that they aim to publish the government's full response to the consultation on these measures after the summer recess. And in response to my written parliamentary question, the current Minister said on the 13th of January of this year that the response would be published as soon as possible. So I hope the Minister today can give us an update on when we can expect to see the government's response to the consultation so we can get on with bringing in these crucial regulations. I know that the Minister who has this brief has visited my constituency to see for herself the diverse accommodation available, and I really do thank her for that. I also welcome steps taken by the Government and Birmingham City Council to date. Birmingham City Council has had a specialist team to tackle antisocial behaviour and crime and improve property standards. I'm grateful to the Government to extended the Supporting Housing Improvement Programme with an additional £1.5 million to Birmingham. But since the team was set up, over 9,000 of the most severe hazards, such as severe mould and fire risks, have been removed. They've issued 48 community protection orders against antisocial behaviour, and £8.8 million has been saved by refusing unjustified housing benefit claims. Birmingham City Council also set up their own quality standards programme, but voluntary schemes cannot replace statutory oversight. So far, only 15% of providers have successfully achieved gold, silver or bronze accreditations, and the Council's actions starkly evidence the need for regulation of the sector. But the Minister will be aware that the SHIP funding ends in March 2026, and the Council is bridging the gap with the Homeless Prevention Grant. Only clear regulation will give the Council the tools that they need to manage local provision effectively. I also welcome this week the Government's publication of the statutory guidance for local supported housing strategies. The local strategy is an important step in mapping current and future provision. Proper processes will be formulated for referrals, and housing teams will work with colleagues in health and social care so we can deliver a much better coordinated system. But we must go further. Local authorities are still saying that without new regulations to define minimum standards of support and empower councils to crack down on exploitative providers, vulnerable people and taxpayers will continue to be ripped off. The statutory guidance is an important first step, but it will not fix the problem my constituents are facing today unless we move at pace to bring in these regulations. And none of this is to dismiss the many excellent providers who deliver high quality support every day. Many of them are doing a really good job, and they play a crucial role and change lives. But the sector has also attracted landlords who see vulnerable people as a source of income rather than a responsibility. And without firm oversight, these operators undermine good practice, they exploit residents, and they damage our communities. So to conclude, everyone agrees that people fleeing abuse, leaving prison or care, or battling mental health and addiction deserve somewhere safe, that they are connected to, that truly helps them rebuild their lives. Our communities also deserve to feel safe, and taxpayers deserve to know that their money is protecting people, not enriching those who exploit them. The stories of fear, failure and sometimes outright abuse are heartbreaking, and we cannot look away any longer. Thank you.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Will Forster.
Thank you, Ms Ewell. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship this afternoon. I want to thank the Honourable Member for Birmingham Perry Bath for bringing forward this really important debate. Shelter is a basic human need. It's a human right. The Liberal Democrats and I believe that everyone has the right to a safe, secure and adequate home. It's an issue that's close to my heart. When I served as the Mayor of Woking, I supported Woking's local homeless shelter, the York Road Project, in raising money for them and awareness for them. At the time, I knew I was raising money for a good cause, but as soon as we finished raising that money, the COVID pandemic hit, and that money was invaluable in protecting vulnerable people at one of the most vulnerable times. They are a high-quality provider of support. Woking's Women's Refuge or Sanctuary is another high-quality provider of exempt accommodation. However, I know residents elsewhere of exempt accommodation are being let down badly, whether that be in Birmingham or elsewhere in the country. Those residents have effectively been denied the support they need. Meanwhile, millions of pounds of public money is wasted, or more accurately, transferred to the bank accounts of landlords and providers. They are taking advantage of the destitute, and we need to sort this problem out right now. The system of exempt accommodation was described in the October 2022 report by the former Housing Local Government Select Committee as a complete mess. The Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government Department supported housing review published in 2024 estimated that there are over 634 units of supported housing in Great Britain, with 535,000 400 units located in England alone. The review estimated that by 2040, between almost 1 million and 1,300,000 more supported housing units will be needed, considering current demand, predicted increase, and considering the demographic trends and unmet needs. It's spiralling out of control, and the government needs to get a grip. There are many good providers. I've talked about ones in my constituency. I hope all members have got examples. But there are awful and appalling instances where the system allows exploitation of vulnerable people who should be receiving support, while unscrupulous providers make excessive profits by capitalising on those loopholes. And it's quite apparent that there is a gold rush where money is mainly transferred from the taxpayer through housing benefit. That is a sorry state of affairs. It has now been 3 years since the Supported Housing Act, a private member's bill from the Honourable Member from Harrow East, was passed and received royal assent. Unsurprisingly, the wheels of government have ground along at a snail's pace. 3 years has gone by and we still have not had that implemented due to difficulties in creating regulations. The Guardian last year reported that people are dying and communities are irreversibly damaged due to delays in the law to clamp down on unregulated supported housing. I wonder if the government in this Parliament can create a situation in which we can create regulations, stem the flow of cash into what essentially is a black market and halt those deaths. Right now, whilst we debate here in Westminster Hall, vulnerable people in our society, the homeless, survivors of domestic abuse, those with mental health issues, those released from prison are subject to dangerous housing conditions with little or no support. Considering there is general consensus across the major political parties that regulation contained in the Act is needed, surely it should be implemented as soon as possible. The government should stop dragging its feet. The Supported Housing Regulatory Oversight Act, when it was passed, was meant to improve the situation. The Act states that there should have been a panel set up, and after 3 years, the panel should come up with recommendations for changing planning law. However, this panel has not yet been convened. I've heard from constituents, local authorities and campaigners who are worried that this has been forgotten about following in light of the general election. The extended timeline risks further escalation of these issues without immediate intervention. On behalf of people affected by this, I urge the Minister to consider the following actions. Convene the panel now. By convening the panel as soon as possible, we can enable action on this issue. Accelerate the panel's timeline to give its recommendation. Given that there is already a delay of over a year to set up the panel, having the panel make its recommendation 3 years after the date it is set up will mean those ongoing issues will continue to affect people for too long. I urge the Minister to act this afternoon. Thank you.
Opposition spokesperson Lewis Cochrane.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Ms Llewell, and I congratulate the member for Birmingham Bury Park on securing this important debate. Supported exempt accommodation plays a critical role across the country, but as we have heard, there are clear issues which need to be resolved. It provides housing to support those living independently, and crucially, it supports some of our most vulnerable people in our society. This includes care leavers, people with disabilities, those who have experienced homelessness or rough sleeping, recovering from drug and alcohol addiction, individuals released recently from prison, and victims of domestic abuse and modern slavery. But because of the nature of supported accommodation and the support provided within that accommodation, this accommodation is exempt from the usual cap on housing benefit. That exemption exists for a good reason. However, the sector is fragmented, regulated by multiple bodies, and lacks a single coherent regulatory framework. For some time now, there have been serious concerns about the inconsistency in poor standards, poor quality provision in some areas, and the long-term financial sustainability of the sector. More recently, the government-supported housing review, published in November 2024, showed that in 2023 there were 634,000 units of supported housing in Great Britain. Over a third of these, more than 250,000 units, were claimed through the housing benefit system. Critically, the review also highlighted a substantial shortfall. It estimated that nearly 400,000 additional supported housing units are needed right now to meet the unmet demand. Looking ahead, by 2040, that figure rises dramatically with up to 640,000 additional units required, particularly for older people. Against this backdrop, it is deeply concerning that the sector itself has warned that it is in crisis. In April 2025, more than 170 organisations wrote to the Prime Minister calling for at least £1.6 billion per year in long-term funding for local authorities. Further warnings followed in July 2025, highlighting the risks of strengthening regulation without providing the funding need to make it work. In August 2025, the Local Government Association echoed these concerns, calling for increased funding and issuing of new guidance to help councils prepare for the implementation of the new regulatory requirements. This all sits within a wider housing context that should worry us all. The government has set a target of delivering 1.5 million homes by the end of this Parliament, and yet its own figures show that housing supply in England fell to 208,600 net additional dwellings in the year 2024-2025, 6% decrease on the previous year and the biggest fall in 12 years outside the pandemic. Just over 190,600 new homes were built, fewer than in the last final year of the previous government and 16% below the peak of 2019-2020. Against this backdrop, I want to turn to the Supported Housing Act 2023. I welcome that the previous Conservative government supported the passage of this legislation, first to directly regulate the standards of supported housing provided under these regulations and supported accommodation in England. The Act received royal assent in June 2023 and has the potential to drive up standards, improve accountability, protect residents from poor quality provision. However, legislation alone is not enough. The government consulted on the implementation of this Act in the summer of 2025, and in January 2026 it said it would respond as soon as possible. Given the pressures facing the sector, response cannot come soon enough. So I asked the Minister, can they confirm when the government will publish its response to the consultation and when full implementation of the Act will take place? Finally, I want to put on record the action taken by the last government in this area. Alongside passing of this Act, it published a national statement of exemptions for supported housing, setting out what looks like and how local authorities should plan to meet the demand. It invested £5.4 million in enforcement pilots, including in Birmingham, and independent evaluation showed that these pilots improved the quality of accommodation and support while preventing an estimated £6.2 million in illegitimate or unreasonable housing benefit payments. Further support was provided through the updated guidance, good practice resources and £20 million from the Supported Housing Improvement Programme to help councils drive up quality and value for money. The challenge is now clear. Regulation must be implemented properly, swiftly and with adequate funding. Supported housing is not a niche issue. It is a lifeline for hundreds of thousands of people and a cornerstone of our wider housing system. If we fail to get this right, it will be the most vulnerable people who pay the price. That is why I urge the government to act with urgency, with clarity and with the resources needed so that this sector can fully thrive.
Minister.
Thank you, Ms Law. It's a pleasure, as always, to serve with you in the chair. Can I start by congratulating the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Birmingham Perry Barr, on securing this important debate, and also for the clear and comprehensive account he provided of the challenges of poorly managed, in particular non-commissioned exempt accommodation in his constituency. Can I also thank those other members who've participated, my honourable friends, the members for Hall Green and Birmingham Edgbaston, and my honourable friend, the member for Birmingham Edgbaston, along with others, my honourable friends, the members for Birmingham Ladywood, Birmingham Selly Oak, have really championed this issue over, in some cases, many, many years. And I remember the debates in the last Parliament about it. Honourable members, Ms Law will have noticed that I'm not the Minister responsible for supported housing. My honourable friend, the member for the Minister for Local Government and Homelessness, is currently in the main chamber updating the House on changes to local government finance. I will, however, obviously do my best to respond to the various points raised by the mover of the debate and others, but I know my honourable friend would be happy to follow up with any honourable member in relation to specific issues of concern, and I have no doubt that she will be more than happy to meet with the honourable gentleman and indeed members of his constituency should that be appropriate to discuss these matters in more detail. In general terms, Ms Law, can I reassure honourable members of two things? First, that the government takes incredibly seriously the need to ensure that all individuals who benefit from supported housing live in safe and decent accommodation, and that they get the support they need to get back on their feet and improve their lives. These are, in many cases, as we've heard in the debate, very urgent, very vulnerable individuals, sorry, Ms Law, who do need that support if they are to get their lives back on track. Second, we remain firmly committed to addressing exploitation and profiteering at the hands of rogue exempt accommodation operators. That has been the focus of the debate, understandably. It is worth also making the point that there is, as the Liberal Democrat spokesman and others noted, lots of high-quality providers out there, and there is, as the Shadow Minister rightly argued, huge unmet need in this area. That is why, at the spending review, the government announced, as honourable members will know, £39 billion for a new 10-year social and affordable homes programme. We want to see new supply of supported housing in England come through that new programme in greater numbers. And while we didn't set any numerical targets or ring-fence budgets for that new programme, it has been designed with the flexibility necessary to ensure that those types of accommodation that require higher grant rates can come through in the new programme in the appropriate numbers. It should also be said that we're providing wider support for the supported housing sector. We announced £159 million through the local government finance settlement over 2026-29 for support services in supported housing, working with targeted local areas, and officials are confirming allocations with those areas in the coming days and weeks. But I recognise, Ms Law, not only that Birmingham has significantly more supported exempt accommodation than anywhere else in the country. The honourable gentleman rightly said approximately 31,000 individuals housing around 11,000 units, but also that it faces acute challenges in respect of unsafe and poor quality supported housing. I think it was mentioned, but the local government and Homelessness Minister recently met with the leader of Birmingham Council and with members representing a number of Birmingham's constituencies to discuss the ongoing problems that Birmingham in particular faces. It's worth me saying, as a few general remarks, Ms Law, around supported housing, that it helps those who need extra support to live as independently as possible in the community. And that support can take many forms. Some individuals may need supported housing for a short time while recovering from a period of crisis. For others, supported housing is a home for life, helping them to live independently outside of institutional settings. The government appreciate fully that there have been real issues in parts of the supported housing market. Far too many residents over recent years have been placed in inappropriate accommodation or dangerous situations with little to no support. And as we've heard today, the impact of unsafe, poor quality supported housing on residents, their families and communities should not be understated. Increased antisocial behaviour resulting from poorly managed housing and knock-on impacts for wider services such as the NHS and the police are frequently brought to the attention of the department. And communities across the country that have been blighted by these problems include a number of areas, but we know, as I've said, the issue is most prevalent in Birmingham. That state of affairs, let me be very clear, Ms Law, is intolerable. It can't be allowed to continue. That is why the government is taking action. It is worth me pointing out that there has been action prior to and alongside the legislation that the previous government supported and that we've been taking forward. The Supported Housing Improvement Programme has been in place in Birmingham since 2022, and before that the Supported Housing Oversight Pilots have resulted in real improvements. And I think the honourable gentleman made that case in his opening remarks. The multidisciplinary teams that have been established in the local authority across housing enforcement, adult social care and housing benefit teams have strengthened understanding and have allowed that targeted action to take place. And while that programme will end in March, the lessons learned and the actions taken by Birmingham City Council should now be firmly embedded. But we are ending that funding as we work towards implementation of the Act. And thereafter, local authorities will charge fees for the administration and enforcement of licensing in particular going forward. So we haven't cut off all funding with a view to having no replacement. It's alongside our intentions to roll out the legislation. Let me turn to that legislation, which has rightly been the focus of much of the debate. I remember taking it through the House as the Shadow Minister at the time. We should really commend the Honourable Member for Harrow East for the private member's bill that was then supported by the previous government, and all the work he did on the wider homelessness agenda. But that legislation was a response to long-standing concerns about the quality of non-exempt supported accommodation, its oversight, the value for money questions we've heard about today. Despite there being many excellent supported housing providers, regulation in this area is absolutely needed. The government is working to bring forward the necessary measures to improve quality and oversight as soon as possible. I'm happy to tell honourable members that we intend to implement that legislation in stages over the coming months, and I'll provide some more detail on the different elements of the Act that we intend to take forward and the timescales. But local authorities, it should be said, can use and should still use their existing enforcement powers to take action against poor quality accommodation as we do so. I'm pleased to say that this week, Ms Law, we've allocated £39 million in new burdens funding to local authorities to start work on their local supported housing strategies. That includes Birmingham. These strategies ask local authorities to assess their current supply, estimate unmet need and future demand for supported housing and set out how they'll meet it. The first strategies are due to be completed by the 31st of March 2027, and statutory guidance to support this work was published just earlier this week. The Liberal Democrat spokesman challenged me on the advisory panel. It has not been forgotten about, I can assure him. We are moving forward with its establishment. The chair will be officially appointed imminently, and the panel will be officially convened. The panel, as he knows, will then advise the government on the implementation of the Act as a whole and consider what further support the supported housing sector needs going forward. But we are taking that part of the Act forward. The government also consulted, as has been mentioned a number of times, on its proposals for supported housing licensing and new support standards. We did that last year. I know that a response has been anticipated for some time. It will be published as soon as possible. I well understand the urgency that honourable members across the House have expressed. We'll publish the new national supported housing standards along with guidance so that residents, providers and local authorities know the standard of support we expect. And we'll consult on licensing regulations later this year, giving stakeholders an opportunity to comment on the regulations before they're debated in Parliament. I think this is really important. It goes to the point of those high-quality providers that several honourable members have spoken about. We do need to ensure that in rolling out that licensing scheme in particular, we're introducing it in a way that's both proportionate but effective, and so that it doesn't penalise those high-quality providers at the expense of bearing down on the rogue providers and operators we've been discussing. Local authorities will receive new burdens funding to establish their licensing scheme, and will monitor the licensing scheme to ensure it is having the intended effect. So to conclude, Ms Law, the government is committed to implementing the measures in the Supported Housing Act and to giving local authorities the powers they need to tackle the problems evident in supported housing in Birmingham and across England. The progress that's already been made is worth noting. We want that to continue. We want councils like Birmingham to make use of the existing powers they have. My honourable friend, I think, mentioned some of the progress made under a SHIP. Birmingham in total, with both the SHIP and the previous programme, received a total of £6.5 million in funding. But that has rightly seen huge amounts of benefit. £8.8 million of housing benefit spend prevented. The number of cases where support was deemed to be inadequate has dropped from 33%. We're seeing the proportion of inspected properties that meet the decent home standard rising from 44%. So there has been progress made, but the regulatory framework that the Act introduces does need to be brought forward. I happily give way.
Minister, for giving way, given that there is a delay in the Act coming into force, would the Minister consider issuing interim guidance so that local authorities can get on more swiftly with some of the changes that they've been asking for a very, very long time?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. We have issued guidance just earlier this week in respect of some of the provisions that are in that Act, but I will ensure that my honourable friend, the Minister for Local Government and Homelessness, has heard his call in that area for more support, more guidance to come forward alongside the implementation of other elements of the Act. But the Government and my honourable friend the Minister are committed to working with all honourable members, local authorities and supported housing providers to make sure that these measures have the intended effect, and that ultimately, as we all want, and I think this is a cross-party, aside from the note of party political debate injected into our discussions by the Shadow Minister in regards to wider housing supply, I think this particular issue, there is cross-party consensus about what needs to happen and the need for that regulatory framework to be introduced so that we can get supported housing that is good quality, appropriate for the needs of the individuals within it, and helps them to live, Ms Law, as independently as possible. Thank you.
Ayub Khan to wind up.
Thank you, Chair. Can I first thank the Honourable Member for Edgbaston and for her efforts in this debate, not just a contribution here today, but the work that she's done in Parliament previously. I'd like to also thank the Honourable Member for Hall, Green and Moseley for his interventions. I know that the Honourable Member for Erdington is not here, but we've had very lengthy conversations, and it seems that she's equally concerned, as are all the other parliamentarians for Birmingham, with the sheer saturation of exempt accommodation. And I think we all recognise the vulnerabilities of the individuals that we all come across on a daily basis in our local shopping centres, at our local hospitals, the pressure on the West Midlands Police when there are incidents. So there's an enormous knock-on burden within Birmingham, which is really being felt by the local residents. And I think historically, people that we now come across, the vulnerable individuals, many of them would not be walking on the streets. They'd be in care homes receiving the right level of care, and we don't see that. I'd like to also thank the spokesman for the Lib Dems and the Right Honourable Gentleman for the opposition and his contribution. But you know, as the Minister said, we are all essentially singing off the same hymn sheet. We all understand the importance of supported accommodation for those that can live with minimal support and integrate into society and contribute to local neighbourhoods. But unfortunately, we're not getting that. And licensing and enabling the council to have the ability to regulate this sector is so important. And I hear the Minister, and the phrase "soon as possible," I'm afraid, is not going to be well received by local residents that have to deal with the challenges they face on a daily basis. And even if, and I accept that, of course, consultation with providers is a very important part of the process, especially those that do amazing work in providing support for these vulnerable individuals that live within local neighbourhoods. But if there is going to be a delay because of that consultation, then one thing which I'd like the Minister to take away is a reconsideration of the SEA grant, which is given to Birmingham City Council, because if licensing kicks in, let's say towards the end of the year or even next year, whenever that may happen, the fact is that we haven't got the capacity to deal with the problems that communities face at present. So would the Minister take that away? Thank you, Chair. I can see that I may have gone over my time.
The question is that this House has considered supported exempt accommodation in Birmingham. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.